All right, my name is Dr. Debbie Quackenbush, and this is a presentation designed to answer questions that I get a lot of times in my practice. I'm just calling it Using Insurance to Pay for Psychotherapy in Denmark, an expat's guide. So I'm going to divide this presentation into two major categories. The first one is being the public sector and the second one being the private sector. The public sector is if you want to get your psychology visits covered by the Danish healthcare system. And the private sector would be if you have private insurance of some sort that you either pay for personally or your company pays for and is a benefit. So under the public sector, I'm going to tell you about a few different things, including what is paid for, the process of getting a referral to a public psychologist, the kinds of psychologists who are available to take referrals, co-pays that need to be paid, and waiting times. In terms of what is covered or paid for, it is true that if you use the public psychology system, that not every problem is paid for. That's true with a lot of kinds of insurance, but it is true with the public Danish healthcare system. There are some things that are not covered. For example, couples therapy is usually not covered. And if you want to go to therapy to understand why you choose the same kinds of partners, so it's kind of more exploratory, what we think of as psychodynamic therapy, that's usually not covered. And there are a list of covered problems that you can find, and I'm going to provide the link below, but you just should know that not everything is covered. How do you access this? There's a process of referral, just like there is with any specialist in Denmark. You go through the gatekeeper, which is your primary care physician. So you talk with your doctor first, and you get what's called a henvisning or a referral, psykolog henvisning, and they will put you in the system, and then you will be able to select a psychologist. In terms of selecting a psychologist, it's also important to know you can't just go to any psychologist. You couldn't go see me, for example, or anybody in my office. You have to have something called an ydernummer. And what that means is that, most insurances, including public insurances and private insurances, will work with a select few psychologists. What they do to keep their costs down is they say to these psychologists, we're going to give you less money than what you want for a session, and in exchange we will give all of our clients to you. And so that what that does is that guarantees the psychologist some volume, but they have to give a lower price. Now, the way that is in Denmark, there's only a limited number of slots for psychologists to provide therapy in the Danish system. From what I understand, that number stays relatively constant, and it's even like I couldn't get one of those numbers, and I don't know any expat psychologists who have one. I have even heard stories of older psychologists, people waiting for them to die so that they can get their ydernummer. That's kind of odd or macabre, but at any rate, if you want to find them, you go to that link below, and you can often see what the wait is and what areas people are in, and try to find somebody who's taking referrals. Very often these psychologists are full. Now, there often are co-pays and session limits. Again, it's a way insurance companies control costs, and that doesn't exclude the public sector. But you will have to pay for a portion of the therapy. I've heard that it's about 400 krona per session out of pocket that you pay per session. Now that is a lot less, so it can be worth it to use this. Oftentimes there are session limits, and that means that the Danish healthcare system has said that for this kind of problem we're only going to pay for this number of sessions. So there's some oversight about how many sessions you're allowed to have depending on your diagnosis or problem. Something people ask about a lot of times are waiting times. There can be waiting times. Again, if you look at that website, sunhel.dk, or .dk in English. A lot of times you can see the waiting times of the specialists on there, and but it is one of the advantages of getting a private therapist is often there aren't big waiting lists, but there can be waiting times for your public sector psychologists. So now I'm going to cover the private sector, and you'll notice that there are a lot of things in similar to the public sector, and that's just because all insurance companies, they seek to maximize the number of benefits to the most number of people for the least amount of money. In the private sector, the difference is, of course, that somebody down the chain is making a profit. But with the private sector, you have some of the similar things and things you need to know about. You do have provider panels, so not everybody can take private insurance. I'm one of the psychologists in town who can take a lot of different kinds of private insurance. You also have the issue of billing. How do you get your psychologist paid, or how do you pay? And finally, I want to talk about control of your treatment and who gets to say how your treatment is administered. Okay, so provider panels, as I mentioned earlier, help to control the costs. And what provider panels are, it's a group of psychologists who provide services for the clients with a given kind of insurance. That insurance very often will have a contractual arrangement with each of those psychologists, whereby they specify, here's the rate we're going to pay you, here's how we're going to pay you, here's the information we need from you. And in exchange, we'll pay you by the first calendar month after we get the final bill. Something like that is what the contract will say. So what if the clinician you want is not on the provider panel? So what if you wanted to come to one of the psychologists in my office and they weren't on your provider panel? All is not lost, because your insurance companies to some extent do want to keep the consumers happy, and they want to make sure that there's a somewhat of a selection of psychologists. You can complain to your HR in your company if you have one. You can also complain to the insurance itself. But also one thing you can do is you can ask for the company to add a psychologist of your choosing to their panel, either on a one-time basis or permanently. They're more likely to do that if you have a specific reason to see that person, not just that you want to, but maybe this person is fluent in your mother tongue, or this person has a specialty in the problem that you have, and they don't have anybody currently on their panel who does that. So they will sometimes change or add a psychologist if you ask them to. And finally, sometimes they reimburse people outside of their panel, but at a lower rate. So these are things you should know about. All is not lost if the psychologist you want to see is not on your panel. And there are some things you can do. Sometimes you can't do anything, but I usually recommend to people to try. Okay, insurance billing. One thing that's a little different about this is that every insurance company has a different procedure to bill. And I will tell you guys, in terms of when I take insurance, I've got a couple of contracts that I have with insurance providers where they pay me directly, but for the most part, I have my clients pay me up front, I provide them with the billing, and then they're reimbursed by their insurance company. Ultimately, you should know that no matter what kind of insurance you have, it is ultimately your responsibility to pay for your bill. So if for some reason your insurance company says, sorry, we won't cover this, we thought we would, but now we won't because of X, Y, and Z, you are then responsible. It's important before you get started to find out how all this is going to go down, or how they want to be billed, what kind of information they're going to need from you or from your psychologist. Most people are okay with just receipts or invoices. Some people want it all on a larger list of sessions. Even fewer will want to have more details about the session. And occasionally I get an insurance company who wants to have the whole case file. That is not appropriate. I won't provide it because I just think it's a privacy issue. And usually if I push back a little bit, they'll agree to just get a list of sessions. asking for a little bit of information, like is there improvement, what kinds of techniques are using, that's not that weird, and I will give that. But if it's really unusual and a bit unethical for them to ask for the whole case file. Finally, I want to say something about control of treatment, and that all insurance companies will try to control your treatment a bit. And I mean, there's a good reasons for that. There have been some instances in the past where clinicians will abuse the fact that you have insurance, and they'll just keep you in therapy forever and ever, or keep running, if you're talking about medicine, running unnecessary tests so they can get paid for it. But the long and short is, of course, insurance is a good thing in that it provides more care to the greater number of people, but it will give you less control over your treatment in terms of the number of sessions, having to justify ongoing treatment. A lot of times I have to say, if you're feeling better, we have to stop. And that may not be what I think is appropriate as a clinician. Maybe I think you need to come in a few more times and solidify some change. Also, some insurance companies will moderate the kind of treatment they think you should be getting. And remember that their objective is to make money. And so this is how they do that, is by controlling access. So that is all I'm going to say to you now. I hope this was helpful. If you want any information about me, you can look at my website at debbiequackenbush.com, or me and my colleagues at thelittlewhitehouse.dk. Thanks.